I'm quite conscious as a Meath man of Tipperary parentage, speaking to a room full of Dubliners, to be wary of a Cork man claiming to be simple. Well, I'll say nothing about Limerick because I'm terrified of Breed. But, so, Chair, members of the Assembly, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to join my colleagues Breed and A this morning to discuss the proposed options for local government structures in Dublin. Breed and A have, they've highlighted some of the issues that will arise as you come closer to recommending powers and resources and the other related elements that a reformed and revitalised local government system in Dublin should have. Sometimes these issues relate to a lack of clarity over a key term, or the period over which a power might be devolved, or the extent of a power. For example, does it include X or Y? As my colleagues and I have previously highlighted, to the best of our ability, our role is to advise you as you see fit and answer any questions that might come up. And we really look forward to doing that for the rest of the day. So this morning, in the next the sessions, you'll be discussing 4 options that look to the structures. These options have come from your suggestions, from the discussions from the table, from submissions we've received to date, and they've been distilled down into 4 relatively broad options, and you'll see that there's some commonalities, and I'll speak to these over the course of the next few minutes. I want to start by sort of highlighting some matters that I feel and my colleagues feel will guide your work, and then I'll briefly talk to some of the issues or some of the characteristics of the 4 options and the challenges and the obstacles that might arise or the questions you might ask among yourselves in implementing each option. The first matter I want to speak to relates to a suggestion implicit in some of the discussion to date that it's possible to graft a new city and county-wide tier of decision-making to the existing 4 local authorities, and everything will continue as normal, but somehow better. We've discussed this among ourselves as an expert advisory group at length over the past 3 meetings of the Assembly and over the summer. We've discussed with many of ye, and we're of the view that this would be quite a misleading understanding. A directly elected mayor and possibly a city and county-wide directly elected structure underpinning that would of the necessity directly impact on many of the operations and structures of the existing 4 local authorities. For example, the informal collaboration and unstructured manner in which senior officials decide major city and county-wide policy decisions would in time disappear and be replaced by a more formal and transparent and accountable structure. There would be implications for the administrative structures of the remaining 4 local authorities. The key role of Dublin City Council as a lead agent in many areas, as highlighted by members of the Assembly on a number of occasions over the first 3 sessions. For example, traffic management, transport, water and fire brigade are unlikely to continue in a manner as they have to date, and would probably have to be incorporated or delivered through some new city and county-wide tier via a service level agreement to ensure some form of democratic oversight and accountability. The appropriate tier for city and county spatial planning, one of the key functions of local authorities. It's currently the city and county spatial planning structure is a subset of the Eastern and Midland Regional Assemblies Metropolitan Area Spatial Plan or Strategic Plan, and the 4 local authorities' city and county development plans and the related local economic and community plans. These in time would need to be reviewed and restructured. These examples don't include any devolution of new competences, for example, education and skills or childcare, or the ceremonial functions that the remaining Lord Mayors and Cathaoirleach might retain. As an expert advisory group, it doesn't appear feasible to allow for the election of a directly elected mayor with real and substantial powers without significant changes to the existing local authorities. To borrow from the great Italian novelist Lampedusa and his work in The Leopard, if we want everything to stay as it is, everything has to change. In relation to what I refer to as guiding principles, I think it's worth thinking about relationships, worth bearing in mind a very complex set of relationships between citizen and councillor, councillor, mayor and council, councillor and official. These are at the core of much of the discussions to date. In many ways, the structures you recommend will follow your views on the appropriate balance between these overlapping and intertwined set of relationships. As we have seen, as it relates to local government, citizens in Ireland tend to be significantly underrepresented in comparison to their EU counterparts, and citizens in Dublin, and with that I mean GAA Dublin, are underrepresented in comparison to other parts of the country, and citizens in the City of Dublin are underrepresented in comparison to other parts of the county. As we have seen, the roles performed by councillors in the Irish local government system tend to be less expansive than the roles councillors perform in other EU local government systems. This is completely separate from the powers or competences allocated to local government per se, and as you may recall, Ireland has the unenviable league position of second last out of 47 European local government systems in terms of local autonomy and competences. In addition, the roles of the Lord Mayor, Mayors and Cathaoirleach are overwhelmingly ceremonial, and while we as a city and county or counties have been very lucky to be served by many excellent Lord Mayors, Mayors and Cathaoirleach, these elected representatives who have given such incredible public service. The issue is, at the heart, the roles are very limited and limiting in a way that raises questions about the type of institutions that don't provide substantial role for such committed and service-oriented elected representatives. I hope these views will contribute to your discussions this morning about the proposed structures. I'm conscious, of the four options that you actually haven't seen the visual representation yet, so please bear with me. I'll try and keep it an overview as best I can. The first thing I want to say is that you'll see from the four options there are sort of two important shared components. The first is the role of a Director General or DG or a Chief Executive Officer, and that builds on the outstanding work and the rigorous analysis carried out by the Limerick Mayor Implementation Advisory Group and the Oireachtas pre-legislative scrutiny process on the Limerick mayoral legislation. This role is a critical re-evaluation and refocusing of the role of the senior public official in the local government system. And I think it's important that this is, we're looking at sort of 90 years of a very particular role, and we now have a very, very substantial review and analysis of that. So that work is done. The second shared component of the proposed city and county-wide is a proposed city and county-wide citizens' assembly, and it builds on your experience and follows the trailblazing example of Paris and several Belgian and Dutch municipalities. So in relation to the four options you're going to look at, are the four proposals. In the first, you will see a cabinet of 5 to 10 councillors. So some of the questions I suggest might be useful is like, well, how will that cabinet be elected or selected? Does the directly elected mayor handpick a group of councillors from the existing 4 local authorities to support her or him in carrying out their work programme? Would it work in a manner similar to the corporate policy group of existing local authorities? Is the directly elected mayor in some way accountable to such a cabinet? On what basis? How could a body lacking an electoral mandate to hold a directly elected mayor with his or her electoral mandate to account? There's also a proposal for a working group or set of working groups, and a second set of questions relate to that. What would they work on? How would they be selected or elected, on what basis? How would the areas of work be decided? Would they be fixed broad categories like the existing strategic policy committees, or much more ad hoc and reactive to given circumstances that the directly elected mayor highlights? Where would the work go? Would a directly elected mayor be obliged to accept recommendations, and if so, why? A third set of questions relate to the leadership of the retained local authorities. In this option we see keeping 4 local authorities underneath. Is there a suggestion that's come from the floor that the new directly elected mayor would subsume the roles of the existing ceremonial Lord Mayor, Mayor and Cathaoirleach? It's quite a practical suggestion that's been made before in previous proposals, and that would allow the city and county's first ever first citizen to reside in Dawson Street and utilise the existing civic infrastructure. But there's lots of issues and questions that arise from that suggestion. There's been a suggestion that in such a model we'd have 4 deputy mayors. But what would the relationship be between the deputy mayors and the 4 retained local authority structures and the directly elected mayor? Would the deputy mayors focus solely on the local authority chairing role, or might they have some broader city and county-wide remit, and on what basis? The second proposal, again, builds on retaining the 4 local authorities, and it sees key innovation of the introduction of a city and county-wide structure that's elected to hold the directly elected mayor to account. So they're elected to hold, with a mandate, to hold the DEM to account and to help coordinate and manage the city and county. This was a feature of earlier legislative proposals. So A mentioned 24, but say 20 to 25 directly elected members would be full-time politicians elected via maybe a single city and county-wide constituency. That would be big. And that was like Boston, and for many years that's how they ran their system, one single constituency. But they changed it, and you might remember the Boston speaker, one of the reasons they changed from a single constituency to breaking it into smaller constituencies, a single constituency gave an awful lot of power to parties and become quite difficult for independents. So we might be looking at a smaller number of democratically representative constituencies, or maybe a combination. But that's for you to think about. It's here today, it's about really us posing questions that might help you with your deliberations. In this proposal, we'd also see a cabinet that would work with the mayor, though in this case, the cabinet would be a subset of the elected, that city and county-wide tier, whether we call it an assembly or an authority, and the cabinet would be a subset of that, and they would be full-time politicians. The next proposal, it builds on the key innovations of the second. You have a city and county-wide directly elected structure and cabinet, but it adds 2 new components. The first is the introduction of a much smaller unit of local government, closer to the citizens. We call them town councils, but they could be municipal councils, district councils, area councils. Each town council would have a population of approximately 80,000 citizens. The second new component is the introduction of a plenary mechanism whereby all the councillors from the 18 to 20 councils would meet to advise and suggest courses of action to the directly elected mayor and the city and county-wide directly elected structure. The role of such a plenary mechanism would be augmentary in the same manner as the proposed Citizens' Assembly. It's not a mechanism to ensure accountability or elect anybody. That job stays with the body that has the mandate to do that, a directly elected city and county-wide tier. Its function is to provide advice and suggestions from an additional source, similar to the proposed Citizens' Assembly. It is not and should not be seen as the equivalent to a directly elected body representing the cities of Dublin City and the citizens of Dublin City and County. The final proposal is similar to Proposal C, with the key exception that we go back to the building blocks of the 4 local authorities. It includes a city and county-wide elected structure, a cabinet, a mechanism to bring together all the councillors from the existing 4 local authorities, but bear in mind they would actually in many ways be quite different. So some questions that arise for you. Would a model like this address the underrepresentation of citizens in Dublin and Dublin City? The options suggest that a directly elected mayor would still subsume the ceremonial roles and posts of Lord Mayor, Mayor and Cathaoirleach. What's the relationship between the lead in the retained local authorities and the directly elected mayor and the city and county-wide assembly? And would those remaining local authority structures, would they focus solely on their local remit? These are just some of the questions you'll have to engage with in the coming hours. And I thank you for your attention, and I wish you well in your efforts this morning. Thank you.